വെൽക്കം ബാക്ക് ടു മൈ ചാനൽ. ഇന്നത്തെ എൻ്റെ വീഡിയോ കാലിക്കറ്റ് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി 6th സെമസ്റ്റർ BA ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ലിറ്ററേച്ചറിലെ വോയിസസ് ഓഫ് വുമൻ്റെ 2ാം പാർട്ടാണ്. അപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ഇന്ന് ഏത് ചാപ്റ്ററാണ് ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കാം. ഫസ്റ്റ് മൊഡ്യൂളിൽ ഷേക്സ്പിയർസ് സിസ്റ്റർ റിട്ടൺ ബൈ വിർജീനിയ വൂൾഫ് എന്ന എസ്സേയുടെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ആൻസേഴ്സാണ് ഇന്ന് ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ആൻസേഴ്സിലേക്ക് കിടക്കാം. Answer the following in 2 or 3 sentences. 1. What is the setting of Virginia Woolf's book A Room of One's Own? The setting of Virginia Woolf's book A Room of One's Own is the educational, social and financial disadvantages women have faced throughout history. The major argument is a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to succeed as a writer. 2. Who is Judith Shakespeare? Judith Shakespeare is an imaginary sister of Shakespeare. It was an imaginary person created by Virginia Woolf to show how she would have failed even if she had the same talents like Shakespeare to write. 3. What does history say about the position of women? About the position of women, history say they were forced by the parents and compelled by society by the power of laws and customs to get married. So, a woman couldn't demonstrate her genius. Genius must have existed among the working classes and among women, but they had no chance to showcase their genius. 4. What is chastity according to Virginia Woolf? According to Virginia Woolf, chastity then and now had a religious importance in a woman's life. Chastity and virginity are praised in women, but nobody seems to bother with such things when it comes to men. Paragraph questions. Answer the following in a paragraph. 1. The relevance of the title Shakespeare's Sister. The title refers to a section of Virginia Woolf's feminist essay, A Room of One's Own, in which she argued that if William Shakespeare had a sister of equal genius as a woman, she would not have had the opportunity to make use of it. Woolf names this imaginary sister as Judith. Even if Judith were as intelligent, imaginative and skilled to write, she could not have written the poems and plays that Shakespeare wrote just because she was a woman. Even if she wrote them, they would not be accepted by the society, which would brand them as the ravings of a crazy woman. Woolf says that women in those days were capable only of being mothers and housewives. Women were betrothed to any man of their parents' choice. The woman had no say even in her marriage. Thus, the title shows the plight of women during the time of Shakespeare. 2. Judith Shakespeare. Judith Shakespeare is an imaginary character in the essay Shakespeare's Sister, which is chapter 3 of Virginia Woolf's feminist essay, A Room of Her Own. Judith is Shakespeare's imaginary sister. Woolf invented the story of Judith Shakespeare to tell readers the fact about the relationship between women and literature. She states that even if Shakespeare had a sister who was equally talented as Shakespeare, society would not have allowed her to enrich her creativity. The portrait of Judith Shakespeare shows the tragedy and anguish that intelligent women experience. Woolf throws light on the discrimination, victimization, and alienation women face in patriarchal societies. Woolf thinks that Judith, being depressed and oppressed, would have gone crazy for committed suicide. 3. Oscar Browning's attitude towards women. Oscar Browning was a great figure at Cambridge at one time. He used to examine the students at Newnham Women's College of the University of Cambridge and also Girton, another college of the same university. He used to declare that the impression left on his mind after looking over any set of examination papers was that the best woman was intellectually inferior to the man. After saying that, he went back to his rooms and found a stable boy lying on the sofa, a mere skeleton. His cheeks were cavernous and shallow, his teeth were black, and he didn't have the full use of his limbs. That is Arthur, Mr. Browning said. He is a dear boy, really had a most high-minded. It shows Oscar Browning had a very poor attitude towards women. 4. What were the conditions of women in Elizabethan era? The conditions of women in Elizabethan era were very deplorable. They were forced by the parents and compelled by society by the power of laws and customs to get married. So, as woman couldn't demonstrate her genius even if she was one. Genius must have existed among the working classes and among women. The women were supposed to be mothers and housewives doing the household chores and tending the family. The literary works of women received no recognition or approval by the general public as the society was essentially patriarchal. Many of the earlier poems whose authors were unknown may be compositions by women. Women writers were forced to use male pseudonyms to veil their identity. Men had an instinctive desire for fame and ownership. Women writers were ignored. Any woman born with great gift in 16th century would have gone crazy or shot herself or ended her days in some lonely cottage, branded as a half-witch, half-wizard, feared and mocked at. Essay questions. Answer the following in 300 words. 1. Why could not women compose poetry during Elizabethan period? Women could not compose poetry during Elizabethan period because of many reasons. It was a highly patriarchal society where the opinions of women were not important. Women were forced by the parents and compelled by society by the power of laws and customs to get married. So, a woman couldn't demonstrate her genius even if she was one. Genius must have existed among the working classes and among women. The women are supposed to be mothers and housewives, doing the household chores and tending the family. The literary works of women received no recognition or approval by the general public. Many of the earlier poems whose authors were unknown may be composition by women. Women writers were forced to use male pseudonyms to veil their identity. Men had an instinctive desire for fame and ownership. Women writers were ignored. Any woman born with great gift in 16th century would have gone crazy or shot herself or ended her days in some lonely cottage branded as a half-witch, half-wizard, feared and mocked at. Any woman who was born with the gift of poetry in the 16th century was an unhappy woman, a woman at strife against herself. All the conditions of her life, all her own instincts were hostile to the state of mind which is needed to set it free, whatever is in the brain. There are many difficulties that a poet has to face. Everything is against the likelihood that it will come from a writer's mind whole and entire. Material circumstances were against it. Dogs will bark, people will interrupt, and money must be made. The biggest problem was people's indifference. People don't ask any person to write anything. While these were problems for all poets, there were more so for women. They didn't have a room of their own to sit and think and write freely the ideas that came into their brains. 2. What are the factors that prevented Judith Shakespeare from achieving literary greatness? There are many factors that prevented Judith Shakespeare from achieving literary greatness. Shakespeare went to London and achieved great success as an actor and playwright. He could get access even to the palace and the queen. But Shakespeare's wonderfully and extraordinarily gifted sister Judith remained at home. She was as adventurous, enthusiastic, imaginative, and eager to see the world as he was. But she was not sent to school. She had no chance of learning grammar and logic. She had no chance of reading Horace and Virgil, Whenever she picked up a book to read, her parents would discourage her. They told her to mend the stockings or mind the stew and not to think about books and papers. There were substantial people who knew the conditions of life for a woman and loved the doctor. So they wanted her to concentrate on the work at home. She might have scribbled some pages, but she hid them or set fire to them. Those days women were not supposed to be writers, so they had to hide or destroy what they had written. Before she was out of her teens, she was betrothed to the son of neighboring Wook, Stapler's son. She cried out that marriage was hateful to her. Then she was severely beaten by her father. Then he stopped scolding her. He begged her not to shame him or dishonor him and hurt him in this matter of her marriage. Unable to continue at home in this condition, she made a small parcel of her belongings and went to London. She was not even 17. She was very talented and had a taste of theatre just like her brother. She stood at the stage door. She wanted to act. Men laughed at her. The manager said no woman could be an actress. She couldn't even seek dinner in a tavern or roam streets at night. She had a genius for fiction, so she longed to write about the lives of men and women and their ways of life. She was very young and looked very much like Shakespeare with the same grey eye and rounded brows. Finally, Nick Green, the actor manager, took pity on her. She became his child. Unable to cope up with the situation, she killed herself and was buried in some insignificant corner. 3. The indifference of the world which Keats and Flaubert and other men of genius have found so hard to bear was in her case not indifference but hostility. Illustrate. John Keats and Gustav Flaubert and other men of genius faced the problems of indifference of the world. John Keats suffered a lot because of the world's indifference, and so did Gustav Flaubert when he was writing Madame Bovary. Writing, whether poetry or prose, is a work of enormous difficulty. Everything is against the likelihood that it will come from the writer's mind whole and entire. Material circumstances were against the writing. Dogs will bark, people will interrupt, and money must be made. The biggest problem was people's indifference. People don't ask any person to write anything. These were problems for all poets, especially to writers like Keats, Flaubert, and Thomas Carlyle. In spite of all the problems, Keats wrote his famous Ode on Aggression, Ode on Indolence, Ode on Melancholy, Ode to a Nightingale, and Ode to Psyche and to Autumn, which are the masterpieces of sensuousness and beauty. In spite of all that, he thought the world would not remember him. That is why he wanted him, tombstone, to be inscribed with "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." Since the world doesn't ask anybody to write poems, novels, and histories, it doesn't need them. It doesn't care if Flaubert finds the right word or whether Carlyle scrupulously verifies this or that fact. Naturally, it will not pay for what it doesn't want. So, writers like Keats, Flaubert, and Carlyle suffer, especially in creative years of their youth, every form of distraction and discouragement. In the case of Judith Shakespeare, who represent women writers of Elizabethan age, it was not just indifference but outright hostility. Even if they dared to write something, they were severely criticized, abused, and rebuked to such an extent that for them, the only way would be stop writing or commit suicide. The patriarchal society was very cruel to its women of genius. They thought women should remain mothers and housewives, doing the household chores and looking after the welfare of the family members. They had no business in indulging in poetry, novel, drama, or history, which were meant only for men. That's all about the questions and answers in the chapter Shakespeare's Sister. Thank you.